The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving two presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa Godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, This book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Excuse me. This cold is still hanging on after 4 weeks. It's insane. Anyhow, it is May the 4th, and that, of course, is the anniversary of the 1970 murder of 4 young people by the National Guard in Ohio. Crosby, Stills, Young, and Nash singing about this. Here we go. Remember that? 4 dead in Ohio. Yeah, it's. I don't want to play too much of it here. We'll end up having to pay royalties, but it's. Could this happen again? I mean, have we reached the point now where we're as polarized as we were in 1970? In 1970, you had like Governor Ronald Reagan, coming out and saying that he's going to do away with free public education in California because those brats are out there protesting the war. Remember that? And that kind of set the tone for the nation of, hey, it's okay to kill those brats. Let's just take them down. Could we be facing that kind of thing in a Trump administration? Or would he simply do like Hitler did and allow his volunteer forces, the brown shirts, who were not affiliated with the government, they were volunteers, sort of Hitler's version of the Tea Party, to do the killing and the butt kicking and whatnot? Number one. Number two, Rudy Giuliani. Let me combine a couple of things together here. Rudy Giuliani just got thrown under the bus by Trump. Trump says, oh, Rudy doesn't have his facts straight. Don't worry, he'll get it all straight. In other words, we tried this trial balloon. Heather Digby Parton over at Raw Story writes, and this is just absolutely brilliant. She is just so good. She writes, evidently Giuliani and Trump cooked this strategy up all by themselves. This whole do the media thing and blame it all on Michael Cohen. Bringing to mind one of those movies where the aging crooks sit in the diner and plan their last big heist, which naturally enough goes terribly wrong because their skills aren't as sharp as they used to be. She adds, you'll recall that at one time it was assumed that Giuliani would be in the cabinet, perhaps as Attorney General. But gossip at the time held that Trump noticed that Giuliani was dozing off in meetings and didn't think Giuliani was smart enough for a big job, sharp enough for a big job. So he put him in charge of some cybersecurity program, which Giuliani promised to get right as soon as he figured out how to set the clock on his brand new VCR, and that was the last we heard about it. I love it. But it raises a much larger question. That and this fascinating piece by David K. Johnson in Salon today, is Trump a broke billionaire? Now, you know, I went back yesterday and a couple of days ago and shared with you the story from, you know, that Donald Trump, you know, from the guy who was the reporter for Forbes magazine at the time, and his responsibility was putting together, or excuse me, not Forbes, it was Fortune, putting together the Fortune 400, the list of the Fortune 400. And the very first 3 years, this guy was in charge of it, or maybe the first 4 years. And every year, Donald Trump called him up, pretending to be John Barron. And he has, you know, the Washington Post has the recordings of the calls. Donald Trump called him up and said, you know, Donald Trump, you know, pretending not to be Donald Trump, said, Donald Trump is worth billions, billions. And so in the first year, he said, well, okay, he's not worth billions, but we'll list him at 200 million. It turned out, and they found this 3 years later, or 4 years later, they found out that he was actually only worth $5 million. So right from the get-go, the Forbes list was a lie, based on lies that Donald Trump fed the media. This guy, you know, lying is part of his business strategy. It's part of his personal strategy. It is at the core of Donald Trump's life. He is a pathological liar. He surrounds himself with people who are either willing to facilitate or enable those lies. Rudy Giuliani, the latest in the crew, although Giuliani seems to share many of the personality characteristics that Donald Trump has, including the multiple wives. So David K. Johnston is now coming out and saying, you know, not only was he only worth $5 million back then, that was before his bankruptcies. He's destroyed his businesses. And he points out that in 1990, now the Forbes thing was in the 1980s, in 1990, Trump was trying to get a license to run a casino. And he had to submit actual, real financial data to the Nevada Gaming Commission. And they concluded, based on actually looking at his books in 1990, that he had a negative net worth of $295 million. In other words, he not only was not worth anything at all, he was almost $300 million in debt. And then Giuliani, David K. Johnston points out, kind of revived this question of, is it possible that Trump is not only not a billionaire, never was a billionaire, always was lying to Forbes magazine. This is why he won't release his tax returns. But is it possible that he's also right now broke? That he is he's more in debt than he has assets to cover it? And Johnston gives a couple of examples of this. By the way, I'd add, it's Anything Goes Friday, so, you know, I'm laying out some topics here, but, you know, feel free to talk, you can call on anything you want. And the point that Johnston makes is that, you know, what self-respecting billionaire or even, you know, multi-millionaire would have to stretch a $130,000 hooker payment, or not, porn star payment, would have to stretch that out over a 4-month period, which is what Trump had to do. He had to pay it at $35,000 a month. He wasn't trying to avoid reporting requirements. That only has to do with cash. And that's anything over $10,000. So it had nothing to do with that. It's like, why did he have to pay it out over a 4-month period? Because he's broke. He ran for president because he was broke. He wanted to raise his profile so more countries and more companies would want to put his name on their buildings, which is the principal way that he makes income these days. Which raises a larger question, which is, at what point does all this house of cards that Donald Trump has been so carefully building since the 1970s, at what point does this house of cards collapse around him? At what point does Robert Mueller come out and tell the American people something so horrific? You know, your president is basically a mob boss. That even the Republicans in the House of Representatives say, you know, we'll sign on for an impeachment. Just like Republicans did in 1973-74 with Richard Nixon. And at that point, if Trump leaves office, and I personally think that the way that something like that would play out is that Trump would resign. I don't, just like Nixon did. And he would do it with an assurance from Mike Pence that he will be pardoned, just like Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. And then he can go back to being a grifter in New York City. But here's the thing. The reason why I think that pardon is so important to him is because the only way that he can prevent damage to himself and his family, and now we know that his son-in-law is as big a grifter as he is, and his daughter is as big a grifter as he is, and his sons are obviously grifters. The only way that he can keep the grift going is to remain in the White House. He has the power to block examinations of him. He has the power to threaten politicians. He'll no longer be able to threaten politicians if he resigns. He'll no longer be able to threaten prosecutors or fire them if he resigns. He'll no longer have, Fox News will no longer have his back if he resigns. So will he turn the guns of America, of the American police forces on his opponents? Will he start imprisoning people? I mean, are we going to go down the road of Erdogan in Turkey? One of Trump's role models? Or Orban in Hungary, or Duterte in the Philippines? Or is it going to be something even more bizarre? What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How do you think this thing is going to play out? And what happens when Pence becomes president? Oh my God. We'll be back. And welcome back. Joe in Bayville, New York, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind? Joe?
Oh, hi.
Hey,
I'm sorry.
you're on the air.
I think this is all about money between both Stormy Daniels and Trump. Stormy Daniels stated that she would be doing a new video with somebody playing Trump. Would you be willing to put on a wig and play Trump and have hot monkey sex with Stormy Daniels on video?
I would not, no.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Is it because you got a 2-inch penis?
I can't even imagine it, Joe. And no, I don't. I can't even imagine it. And that's a pretty crass comment to make on the air. Arthur, I just X'd Joe out. He's not going to be back on the show. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Big fan.
Thank you.
I'm offended. I'm probably preaching to the choir with this phone call, but we should all be offended when any politician, especially the chief executive, lies. Remember back during the Mao Revolution, the agricultural communities were lying blatantly about, say, like the rice production. They were reporting yields 10 times greater than a few years before, just by throwing in inedible plant matter. Same thing with
Alex, your phone is breaking up so badly I can only hear about every other word. Can you clean that up in any way?
Let me see. Is this better?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay. I was saying that when you consider the lies during the Chairman Mao Revolution, they completely forged, I won't say how, it's for time, numbers as well as medical.
Yeah, Alex, I'm sorry, it's breaking up again. I'm going to put you on hold, and you can talk to Arthur. Maybe you guys can figure out what's going on. Let's see, we got a minute and a half. Silas in Philadelphia. Hey, Silas, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I'm glad you're talking about Kent State, but I would hope that every time people mention Kent State, they will also mention Jackson State. Just 11 days later, 2 black students in Mississippi were shot, and we need to remember that black lives matter.
You're right. And if I recall correctly, that was not an anti-war protest. That was a civil rights protest. Or am I misremembering? Because it's been a long time.
I don't remember the details.
Yeah. Okay.
but it happened at the same time and
Yeah.
hasn't gotten the attention. And as I said, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and what a surprise that when black students are killed, it doesn't make the news, but when white students are, it does. I mean, that you would think we would have come so much farther since 1970. And
Yes, but you and I and our other progressives can make it a point to always say that.
yeah, and
We don't have to be them.
I agree. And when we hit the break at the bottom of the hour, and I've got a couple minutes, I'm going to look up the details on the Jackson State thing because I'd like to get it right, and I'd like to talk about it in the proper context.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Silas. Thanks for the call. And yeah, you have a great day yourself. We'll be back in just a moment. It is coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. And what's Donald Trump up to? I've got a few other stories here I want to share with you as well. We'll see how it goes. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Mark in Clinton, Maryland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Yes, sir. Good day, Mr. Hartman. Just two brief questions. The first question I had to ask was, is economic growth, in your opinion, or by statistics rather, economic growth, is it tied to the accumulation of public debt? In other words, the reason why the economy is growing is because more and more people are going into debt?
It can be, and I think in the case of this recovery since 2008, and frankly, I would say probably going back to the late 90s, that a large portion of the growth of our economy is tied to debt, which means that it's unsustainable and that it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yes, sir. And the last question, yesterday, listening to the show, you had mentioned a research paper that was done by MIT about rats and the less food that they had eaten. They had ate rather. It gave them more longevity in life.
That's
do
right.
you remember that article? And what was the name of that article, and where can I find it?
I'm sorry, I don't. If you go back to the podcast from yesterday, I'm not sure if did that go up on YouTube, Nate? That clip, that crazy science. Okay, geeky science. Nate says it's going to go up today, so you can look at. I have thrown the article away. I'm sorry, so I can't tell you, but it'll be on YouTube, and you can check it out, Mark. So.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks a lot for the call, Mike in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
So I called last month, I believe, and you explained the VPN stuff to us very well. My issue is with Google because everything I seem to Google comes through my Facebook news feed, on my timeline, on Instagram, and I was wondering, is that any way connected with George Bush and his administration, the policy that when they tricked us and allowed us they scared us into letting us into our privacy and Eric Snowden and net neutrality. Does that, what Google's doing, does that have anything to do with any of that?
No, I don't think so. Mike, what you're talking about is the various pieces of legislation that allowed the federal government to more effectively and efficiently spy on us, basically. And the stuff that, what's his name, who's hiding in Russia right now, outed. It was Mr. Snowden. And but what Google and Facebook are doing is, the CEO of Apple went to great pains, Tim Cook, to point this out, that Apple makes their money selling you products. They do handle your data. If you say, Siri, tell me something or whatever, that information resides with Apple. And then they also, as you type things in, they're monitoring everything you type in. But they say that they're doing that so that they can optimize the product for you, so that the words that you commonly use will pop up more frequently in the auto fill-in stuff and things like that. So they're not monetizing your information. They're using it to make your experience better. That's what Apple says. I don't know if it's true, but that's what Apple says. Google and Facebook, on the other hand, do not sell a product. You can get free Gmail from Google. You get free searches from Google. You get a free Facebook feed. It's, you know, and you know, you can post things for free, and you can have Messenger for free. And so you are the product with Google and Facebook. They make money off you and your information and what you do and what you say to other people, whereas companies like Apple don't, and presumably Microsoft, although who knows what they're doing with Cortana. So Google and Facebook are doing what they're doing simply because, you know, it's not because they want to spy on you like they're some evil CIA. They want to spy on you to make money from the information they gather from you. This is the new business model.
Marketing, huh?
Yeah, so that's what's going on. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. Great question. Tyler in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hey, Tyler, what's on your mind?
Yes, sir, Tom. You could take my comment, your comments off the air, but I wanted to set it up by saying through Fox News, we discovered that, you know, obviously Trump was paying Stormy through his lawyer, quote unquote, that wasn't really doing any lawyer work, but everybody kind of brushes it off as, you know, well, that's what those guys do. You know, they got the rich guys, they got money, that, you know, they do their thing, and that's what we get. We learned this through Fox News, right?
Well, and the Wall Street Journal actually is where it started. They were the first ones to break the story.
Right, but I'm talking about
also owned by Rupert Murdoch, yeah.
Right, but we watch this and we see the Republicans always talk about how government is bad, but they want to get in the government, right? But now with Trump, because everything is to the 10th power with Trump, so now that's not enough. So what they're doing is they're going after like the democratic pillars of our country, right? Where it's like, you know,
like the media, you mean?
Right, and just the democratic norms that we've come to understand, right? So they're going after that, and what I'm saying why I brought it with the Fox News is because all of the Rupert Murdochs and the big fat cats, they're watching this, right? Just like we have a discussion about it every day, they know, and I'm pretty sure that they have these thoughts as well, but they're kind of laying back. You know, they're trying to see how it all plays out, opposed to actively, just like we're doing, saying, hey, all of this stuff is not normal, you know?
Yeah, and it's messed up.
Normal.
And this is the basis of my question, Tyler, is if Trump, I mean, you know, the rats are generally not all that dangerous unless you corner one, and then they can be really dangerous. I mean, they can just, you know, take a piece out of your face if they want. And I've been there with rats. And Trump is a rat, essentially, in this context. And when he gets backed into a corner, is that when he's going to declare war on Iran? You know, which will make Mr. Netanyahu and AMD or whatever his name is, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, very happy. Is that when he declares war on North Korea? Is that when when his police basically start rounding people up? You know, let's round up the usual suspects. I mean, what's he going to do, Tom?
That's my biggest issue. Like, if we have these conversations and we can see it, those people with the money and the power who can actually get this message out and inform other people, hey, and just give a warning sign at minimum, right? They're not doing that. So my thing is, are they kind of playing their hand like, well, if it does play out in the worst way, we still want to be on Trump's good side, so, you know, and just go with it. And that's whenever you do get the actual merge of business, the corporate world with the state, and that's what I'm more worried about.
It may well be, Tyler. It may well be, and I have no idea how this is going to play out, but I'm very concerned. Tyler, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It is Anything Goes Friday. A new Facebook bias study is going to blow your mind. Stick around. We'll be back with more news and your calls right after this. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you at Jackson State College in Jackson, Mississippi. This is right after the Kent State killing. The students were protesting white motorists harassing them traveling down Lynch Street in Jackson, Mississippi. This led to a riot, which then led to police killing 2 African-American students. Pretty grim stuff. We were talking about today's the anniversary of Kent State. Anyhow, in the meantime, we've got Trump sending a trade delegation to China, and it looks like they just got slapped down pretty effectively. Let's check in with Lori Wallach, the executive director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. TradeWatch.org is the website, or citizen.org/trade. Lori's Twitter handle is Wallach, W-A-L-L-A-C-H, Lori, L-O-R-I, Wallach Lori. Or public_citizen. Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
So what happened with Trump's trade delegation in China, and what does it mean?
Well, I think we are seeing a long overdue sort of showdown about what has been years of the Chinese government basically coming up with their own rules of trade and engagement with the global economy that are not particularly fair for working people here, and certainly don't follow any of the global rules, some of which I don't like, but are ostensibly what all the countries signed up for. Right. I think the thing that's going to come down to, I think it's not going to be, we're not going to know what the outcome of this stare down is going to be for some time, because I think the calculation is from the U.S. side, and, you know, this is something I wish the Obama folks had in mind to do. I think the calculation is what's called the China 2025 plan, which is a $300 billion subsidy plan for China by 2025. The government is putting the money into it to dominate emerging industries like robotics, healthcare, electric transportation, et cetera.
Right. And there's a Made in China piece to that, too. Isn't it sort of like the Buy America Act of 1935? It says that the Chinese government has to source all products to Chinese manufacturers.
That is correct, but also there's just a gazillion dollars, and literally the Chinese government, state-owned sovereign wealth funds buying up U.S. and European competitors to take the technology and transfer it to China to shut down the competition. I mean, it's a very elegant plan. It's just not necessarily in the interest of working people or consumers in other countries. Right. And it's a very government-organized industrial policy, which parts of it seem pretty unfair, but also in the absence of the U.S. having an industrial policy, the prospect of the U.S. worker and consumer getting clobbered is pretty high. But that agenda of China is something that now both the U.S. but Europe, many of China's trade partners are saying, this does not seem like a good agenda in the long term for the rest of us. Right. So whether having that space being contested by other countries, again, I wish a Democratic administration had said, this doesn't seem to be in our interest, but that fight versus China's calculation that they're now too big to really, it's too late to do anything about them. Right. That they were, as a sort of command economy, were able to become so big, so integrated, have been able to have so many entanglements in other countries that at this point it's too late to do anything to push back or sort of renegotiate either the terms of trade and commerce with any particular country, including the very big U.S., or to get a sort of renegotiation multilaterally of the rules of the road.
Right.
And so that's the stare down right now.
Isn't
and those tariffs are just sort of like the 2x4 being waved around to get that conversation started.
Right, tariffs on both sides. China has now apparently stopped buying U.S. soybeans, which is going to whack Kansas and Iowa. And my understanding is that the Trump team went and said, you guys have a $200 billion trade deficit with us, which is kind of down from the $500 billion that Trump announced. And I thought it was actually around $400 billion, but apparently they said $200.
You're right. It's $400 billion. What they said is that China has to cut it by $200 billion in half.
Okay, so, and then the Chinese basically said, yeah, good luck with that. Do I have that right?
More or less. I mean, so your point about the soy is the perfect example of sort of why the U.S. government has said, okay, guys, you have this uncanny ability to just tell your so-called business sector what to do.
Right.
So here's how this problem gets resolved. You are unfairly subsidizing. You are misaligning your currency. You are stealing technology, blah, blah, blah. And all along, you're suppressing any independent unions so your workers don't get paid anything, even as you're developing and becoming a global economic powerhouse. Your workers don't have any ability to bring themselves up as your government and your elites and your businesses are making themselves worldwide leaders. So here are the rules of the road you could think about, or alternatively, just reduce your trade deficit by $200 billion. You're in charge of your economy, so deal with that. And this is in part in response, that demand, to the Chinese government having issued a memo which leaked, so you can read about it in the press, an edict out to all of the state and local government officials saying the top national priority, the signal of your patriotism, is to get all arable land sown in soy, which is to say to get a bunch of planting done, because China's of the prospect that being a not democratic society, being able to have that kind of centralized control means that they can sit through trade frictions for longer.
Sure, and they can.
Ultimately, the corporate lobby will pressure the U.S. government to back down and just cave in.
Yeah, and that's probably an accurate determination, isn't it?
You know, it's hard to say what the level of determination is at this point with the top trade officials. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think probably everyone who's listening to the show recognizes and is horrified at what a morally corrupt, dangerous, dreadful president we have and most of the administration. Perhaps the only beacon of sunshine is the trade operation. The guy who is the top trade guy is a principal guy, Bob Lighthizer. He's smart. He actually has, for decades, had a personal position about these issues that overlaps remarkably with public citizens, with labor unions' positions.
Yeah, he's been on this program a number of times.
ISDS, he's for labor standards. Anyway, he's also a really unflappable guy, and he has a vision about what it means to not contest this China space now before it's too late.
Right.
And so whether his leadership, which has been very strong in NAFTA, which, by the way, I hope we have a second to talk about that, because it does look like, a deal might be forthcoming, and it may not be bad. His leadership on China, I think, is going to be part of the answer to whether this dispute that's been engaged now gets followed out in a way that actually makes a difference. Yeah,
and whether the Trump administration has the courage to do it. I would think that their base, as well as probably most of the rest of America, is supportive of Lighthizer's trade agenda. The question is, will it get corrupted by Trump deciding that some other shiny object is a better one? Yeah, or he needs more money from the Chamber of Commerce. We have a minute left if you want to talk about NAFTA.
Well, here's the sort of preview of coming attractions for what could happen, which is really important because it's not what you'd expect. But it does appear that at this point, some combination of the trade representative being someone who has had a pretty forward-looking view about these agreements, opposed NAFTA from day one, has been demanding the same kind of changes we all have, and the fact that it really became clear in Congress when the TPP couldn't get a majority that it may be the end of the road for the old model corporate-led trade agreement. And, you saw a bunch of Republicans on that side. They were reading the same tea leaves that Trump was when he basically took on the whole Democratic trade agenda and made it his own. So there is some decent chance that basically the negotiators, recognizing where the politics in Congress are more or less going to do what the unions, the consumer groups, the Democrats in Congress have been demanding for decades on a lot of the NAFTA renegotiation issues, which would put us in the odd position of having an agreement that would basically get rid of the outsourcing incentives at the heart of NAFTA, get rid of the Buy America ban, get rid of the investor state tribunals, raise labor standards. Big ifs, but this is sort of the direction it's heading. Don't know if they're going to get there. Don't know if it'll be, what we understand it's heading towards. But if you could have a scenario where the unions, public citizen, and Democrats in Congress are supporting it, and the Republicans in the Chamber of Commerce are against.
Interesting. Lori Wallach with TradeWatch.org, part of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, the executive director. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Great talking with you as always. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls after this. Welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, a few weeks ago you were saying that Senator Cruz of Texas might be like a reptile in that he lacks empathy and emotion because he lacks a limbic system in his brain.
Well, that was in response to the woman who walked up to him and said, "Would you please prove to us that you're not a lizard person?" And he got all defensive and refused to, or not. She didn't even ask if he would prove it. If he would simply assert that he was not a lizard person, and he refused to assert that.
Well, in any event, that sort of stuck in my craw a bit and got chewed on a bit. So I actually ended up doing my first post on Democratic Underground in response, which basically it also included an account of my meaningful experience with a rattlesnake and how I think I did better with a rattlesnake than I would have done with Senator Cruz.
Oh, really?
It's
so what's the essence of it, Mike?
Well, it's a little hard to summarize because it goes into the whole history of man's relationship with the planet, and it's an Earth Day piece. The title was "Why Are You Wasting Your Breath Preaching to Birds, St. Francis?" It's about 35th on the list down of first posts there if you search for it. But also the whole question of that roast, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and Michelle Wolf's takedown of Trump, and how some people were saying it's not really like a roast, and I'd have to agree with them because the pig had fled all the way to Michigan.
Right. In a roast, that's the whole point of a roast. The old Don Rickles stuff is that the guy who's being roasted is in on the joke. They may not like what's being said, and very often it's so close to the bone that it hurts a little, but they make good fun out of it. And Donald Trump is not capable of laughing at himself. We saw this at the White House Correspondents' Dinner 5 years ago, I think it was, when Obama took him down. And I was in the room when that happened. It was an amazing thing to see. And he did not crack a single smile. He just sat there with his arms folded over his chest and just, gritting his teeth. And everybody at the table with him, a couple of them started to laugh a few times, and they were terrified. They were just terrified.
Yeah, most of us can at least pretend to be a good sport when we're being ridiculed, but not him.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for the call. I'm still, wondering about the limbic brain thing. Reptiles don't have limbic brains, so anyhow, we'll find out. Karen in Seattle. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind? Karen, watching us on YouTube in Seattle.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to say your program is my personal oasis in this desert.
Well, thank you. We have a little less than a minute, though, so to the point.
Okay, I was responding to your reading about the assassination of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, and you said that it was it seemed that you solely attributed the murders to the mafia, and it seemed to leave out the element of political control, which seemed to be Allen Dulles. After reading his biography, I was very impressed with his power both in and out of government employment. And it seemed the assassination of President Kennedy seemed to kick off the difference in relation to the rest of the world, which became exploitive. And with John F. Kennedy, he wanted to build up third world countries so they could take care of themselves.
Right.
I'm just wondering if later in the book you dealt with the...
Not so much. That is sort of a variation on disaster capitalism, Karen. There were a lot of different people and a lot of different political groups that took advantage of Kennedy's assassination, both in the left and right. You know, Lyndon Johnson used it to sell us the Great Society, but I don't think it had anything to do with the assassination. Thank you. It's coming up on 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, excuse me, before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Helen in Ithaca, New York, listening to WRSI. Hey, Helen, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. While I was on hold, I heard your conversation about the tariff war with the Chinese, you know?
Yeah.
There's one thing, as soon as that thing started, as soon as Trump opened his mouth, the Chinese, they either dislike Republicans or they have a sense of humor, because before they even mentioned soybeans, they said that they were going to put extra taxes on Kentucky bourbon and Harley Davidsons from Wisconsin.
Right, Kentucky and Wisconsin.
You know, who they're pointing to there.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, no doubt about it.
And the head of the House. That's pretty funny, I thought. Yeah. But anyhow, I called. Yeah, this is a very sad anniversary. I didn't realize it until you mentioned it, that 4 dead in Ohio.
And two dead at Jackson State. Yeah.
Yeah, their family and their friends are probably not having a very good day today. And wouldn't you love to send your kids to college and just have them get, plowed down by police during a peaceful protest?
Yep.
But I got good news after this bad news. We've got our senator here, Gillibrand, and the gentleman, Richard Wolff, who I met here in Ithaca when he came. I also met you here in Ithaca when you came. But anyhow, he's into this, cooperative stuff.
Right.
Anyhow, Senator Gillibrand of New York, the bill is called S-2786. She has 6 co-sponsors. I don't know exactly who they are, but this is in order for people who want to get rid of their business. They don't want to sell it to strangers. No one in their family wants to inherit it, like they're baby boomers who are retiring, and it's to facilitate employees to try to purchase the business.
Yeah.
And she's got a thing in there for loans, to help these employees, because they might not be wealthy, to get loans so that employees can take over the business where they've maybe worked their whole lives,
I think this is spectacular. Louise and I have sold 2 of our businesses to our employees. The first was the Woodley Herber Company in 1978, and the second was Chandler McDonald, an ad agency we owned in Atlanta that we sold. Actually, 3. We sold Chandler McDonald to our employees in 96, and we sold the Newsletter we sold Sprayberry Travel and International Wholesale Travel to one of our employees, not to the whole group of employees, in 86. So we've sold 3 companies to our employees. We financed all 3 of those. We and because we were in a position to do that, we were able to pull money out of the companies. And so when we went off to start a community for abused kids, our employees took over the company in Michigan, and they owned it. We never saw another penny from it. The company, the travel agency, we sold on a straight. They just gave us the money. The ad agency, we sold it on a 7-year buyout because neither of us could really afford to fund it, so they just they paid us every year for 7 years. But it worked, and I think a lot more entrepreneurs would do that kind of thing if the state came along and said, we'll help finance this so that you can bail out quickly and your employees will still be able to buy it without having a large burden of debt or a large burden of expense.
You and your wife were creative, ahead of the curve. I don't know if Richard Wolff knows this, because he just constantly preaches about this, getting cooperative started. But that would be that. I didn't know that about you. That's commendable. That's very good.
Well,
you did that a while ago.
Yeah, and we didn't, we didn't do it for any great noble reason. I mean, our employees wanted to buy the companies, and it's a hell of a lot easier, forgive my language, heck of a lot easier to sell a company to people who are inside it and already know it than to go out and try and sell it to some stranger where you've got to explain everything. There's a greater probability of success, which we were interested in. And, it was just kind of the path of least resistance for us.
So I think Gillibrand's bill is a good idea, and I've already called Schumer, and even though I'm not a constituent of Bernie Sanders, I said, would you also please co-sponsor this bill?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if Bernie hasn't already co-sponsored it, but
he might be one of them.
Yeah, it's a great idea, and it's great legislation. Helen, thanks for calling and for sharing that with us. And Senator Gillibrand, I don't know if she's doing penance for taking down Al Franken, or if
I know
if she's just always been a reasonably good progressive. But I had always thought of her as more of a corporate Dem, but she has certainly become very progressive recently.
She's going more to the left now. Yeah,
and I think it's because she wants to run for president. Yeah. Helen, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Judy in Lakeport, California. Hey, Judy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First, I really want to thank you for letting us have a voice. I want to thank you for that. What I would like to talk about today is the gun control debate. I really feel that it hasn't been authentic, and this is why it's dying out. One thing I really want to point out is that, especially like in the state of New York, young boys get their hunting licenses at 12 years old. This is a very horrible orientation to killing. And the big theme of hunting is thinning the herd. And I wish there was more investigation of these young boys that are becoming serial killers, that their background may be hunting, and that not to just regard it as institutionalized cruelty.
Yeah. I grew up in Michigan. I grew up with a lot of my friends were deer hunters. They'd go deer hunting during the season. I never did that, but it was just kind of part of the culture for blue collar, working class, central Michigan, and I don't think any of them grew up to be serial killers. The thing that you do see with serial killers and sexual sadists is that very often they were torturing animals as children or killing animals, but I think it generally is in a more bizarre context than hunting. But it's a conversation to have. My take on it is that hunting may deaden people's response to death, to the death of other living things, but that it's not provoking it. But I don't know. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Jared, you got a half a minute. You wanted to say something about the May 15th primary?
Yes, there's an upcoming primary in Pennsylvania, Tom, and this is only a local thing that only Pennsylvanians know. There's a primary on the Democratic side. Now, there's an incumbent lieutenant governor named Mike Stack. He is running, but he's having troubles because of, harassment issues with some staffers. Not sexual harassment, but verbal harassment. And it's complicated, confusing story.
Is there a progressive challenging him?
Problems with the governor as well.
Is there a progressive challenging them in the primary, Jared?
Yes, there is, actually. There is a guy named John Fetterman, and Bernie Sanders has endorsed him. He's actually in Philadelphia today.
Cool. Okay.
Holding a rally for him.
So I got to bail here, Jared, but people, always make your biggest point first. Thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Republican Party has been promoting rather aggressively a meme that they were all over with in the mid-1960s when Lyndon Johnson was promoting the Great Society. This was the major pushback against it. I remember William F. Buckley talking about it on PBS. It's just, this has been around for a long, long time. The idea that if you give assistance to poor people, that they become addicted to that assistance and they stop wanting to actually participate in the labor force and to work. There's actually no evidence of this. There never has been. In fact, all the evidence shows that if you give people a large enough foot up that they can participate in the labor force, they will take that and they will move forward. Yes, there's always going to be a small percentage, 1 to 3% of the population who, basically will just take the dole, who will take whatever's offered and don't want to work. But I think by and large, those people are either mentally ill or they're like Trump, they're grifters. But that's a very small price to pay for being able to help everybody else. But now this story that the democratic programs like the Great Society and the War on Poverty and things are actually causing black people to be more enslaved by government programs has been picked up by Kanye West. And that, to me, was rather startling, frankly. Arisha Hatch is on the line with us. She's the managing director of campaigns at Color of Change. Colorofchange.org is the website. You can tweet her at Arisha Michelle. Arisha, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being with us. Your thoughts on my opening riff there?
I totally agree. For those that don't know who Color of Change is, we're the largest online racial justice organization in the country. And it's a weird week to be talking about Kanye West because a big part of our origin story is connected to him. We were founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and our founders, Van Jones and James Rucker, were like many folks watching the news. And Kanye West went on a national televised program and said that George Bush didn't care about black people.
I remember.
And Van and James sent out an email to a few thousand of their friends with the subject line that said Kanye was right. And that email went on to unpack the ways in which Kanye's statement was valid, you know, how corporations and government weren't at all afraid to disappoint black people, how they patted themselves on the backs and called us looters as we struggled stranded on rooftops to survive. And they asked recipients to take a small action and click on the link and join a new 21st century civil rights organization called Color of Change. And so 12, 13 years later, it's interesting to be in another conversation about some of Kanye's statements. You know, after they sent out that email, they also produced T-shirts with the slogan "Kanye was right" and sent it out to folks. You can't wear the T-shirts in public anymore because of his recent statements.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting moment, I think, to begin to talk about the reasons that poverty exists in our country,
and persists,
as well as to push back on some of the dominant or the narratives that are being put into play by Kanye.
My take on it was, you know, when he said this, I wasn't shocked. I was surprised, but I also knew that he has a new album coming out, and you know, one of the imperatives when you've got, as an author, I mean, I'm not an entertainer like Kanye, but I write books, and you know, your number one mission when you've got a new book coming out is to get yourself in the headlines. You know, good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. If you can get yourself in the headlines, you're going to jack up your book sales, and I'm assuming that the same is true with album sales. And so I just figured it was a stunt. I figured, you know, he figured this is the thing that'll get him in the headlines, and in fact, now apparently a lot of Trump supporters are going out and buying Kanye's album. To what extent do you think that this was just basically a transactional, you know, kind of a mercantilistic, you know, driven by a desire to see his album do better, as opposed to any deeply held conviction? He just grabbed a meme that was floating around that he thought might get him some leverage.
Right. Yeah, it's so hard to tell with Kanye. And so I definitely think he's a provocative person, and the conversations that he's provoking nationwide, worldwide are incredibly fascinating. And I think personally, I believe it's hard to tell whether this is like purely transactional and a profiteering motive, whether this is some form of performance art that will be like revealed later, or if these are like his actual deeply embedded belief systems. And so I do want to name that, but I do think what he is doing now, whether intentional or unintentional, provides an opportunity to have a conversation about the ways in which poverty is enabled, the ways in which white supremacy is enabled in our country, and the ways in which those systems work to hold working class, work to hold people of color back.
Well, Arisha, let's have that conversation. We have about 3 minutes left here. What effect do these let's call them Great Society programs in aggregate, because most of them came out of that, although some of them go back to the 30s. I mean, you know, Social Security and things like that. How do these programs help people in poverty? How do they hurt people in poverty, and in particular people of color?
Right, and I think one of the things that we think about at Color of Change is shifting the understanding of poverty from an unfortunate condition and an unlucky condition to an unjust and therefore intolerable condition. And we firmly believe that this poverty cycle will exist as long as ignorance about the real forces at play continue to justify it. Decisions made at all levels of society create poverty and keep it going. And those decisions sustain the conditions that trap people and exploit them, especially black people and other people of color. And it all starts with misdirecting the blame for poverty at poor people's behavior. Right. And away from their leadership and agency and changing the behavior of the true creators of poverty. And so when we hear Kanye say things like slavery is a choice, when we hear these sort of right-wing narratives about personal responsibility and pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps, those are dog whistles in a way for sort of like blaming the very people targeted and harmed by poverty for its existence. And so, and I think that's the discussion that's worth sort of prompting through Kanye's comments. You know, the narrative is partly fueled by the flip side of the American dream, but if we don't break and refashion the belief system that poverty is a set of personal choices or unfortunate events, we will not be able to create demand for solutions that will help end it.
Yeah. To what extent do you think that Kanye and others who are carrying these stories might be unaware of, for example, Lee Atwater's comments back in the 80s, that back in the 60s we could use the N-word, by the 70s we had to go to code words like forced busing, and now here in the 80s we can even leave behind the obviously racial code words of forced busing and replace them with things like tax cuts and entitlement cuts, and everybody understands black people get hurt worse than anybody else. And so when we use these phrases, we're still successfully shouting out to our white racist base.
Right. And so, you know, I don't know Kanye. You know, I grew up with him, and as a sort of Kanye stan, I'm in denial about some of his recent comments. But I would like to believe that he is very much aware of the ways in which narratives are coded. And I think as a figure at his, you know, height of celebrity, that there is a level of responsibility, the same level of personal responsibility that I think these same messages that he's reiterating are, that he has in order to be sort of aware of these things. And so, you know, I don't, you know, I feel like we could flip a coin about what Kanye's really trying to do or what he really believes. We might not really ever know. But what we do know is that these sorts of statements, these sorts of narratives enable systems that are intolerable for working class, black people, and other people of color.
Amen.
They're intolerable.
Aisha, we have to leave it at that. We're hitting the break here. But Aisha Hatch, the Managing Director of Campaigns with Color of Change, colorofchange.org is the website. Thank you, Aisha.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with Anything Goes. And welcome back. What a day, huh? What a week. Albert in Charleston, New Hampshire. Hey, Albert, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks. Good to speak with you. Donald Trump has been in office for 1 year and 3 months, and to my knowledge, has not held a formal press conference in the White House briefing room. That means the White House staff is hoping to do what the lawyers would love to do, which is keep Trump from talking. And I think it's important because I believe it's part of the law. I know he has to address Congress as part of the law, but we're not getting the unfiltered.
No, Albert, just FYI, there is no law that requires the president to say or do anything. And the part of the Constitution that requires him to annually deliver the State of the Union does not require it to be a speech. In fact, Thomas Jefferson was so shy and had a high, squeaky voice and was so frightened of public speaking that James Madison, that the first couple of years he was president, he simply submitted it in writing. And then later on, I believe James Madison gave it as a speech a couple of times, but Jefferson would not address Congress. So there's no actual requirement for that other than just an annual report to Congress from the executive branch or from the president on how the country is doing. Back to you, Albert.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I mean, we're getting now the same strategy we had with Iran-Contra, now with Korea,
Yep.
Bring them home at any cost so that we can make this guy who is taking your rights away look good.
Yeah, I agree.
And if we had Trump unfiltered, he has a tendency to contradict himself, to be caught in lies, that sort of thing. And I think people would understand better. Instead, we're getting the polished commercial version of him.
Yeah, I agree. Albert, thanks. Excellent point, and I would love to see some press conferences, too. Ricky in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Ricky, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener. Thanks. I wanted to ask you today about your opinion about this figure on the, I guess you'd consider him the conservative right, Jordan Peterson.
I don't know much about him.
Oh no. Oh, okay.
What's the story here that I'm missing, Ricky?
I know a lot of my friends have been listening to him, and a lot of them were on the left, and now they seem to be slowly converting to the right wing of things.
Huh.
And it's just.
Yeah, I've heard the guy's name, but I have no idea why. I'm sorry. I don't generally follow right-wing figures, but what is he, just a right-wing YouTube star kind of thing? Is that the story?
Yeah, he's. That's what it seems like. He's been on like a Vice. He got like this very popular video with Kathy Newman from BBC.
Yeah.
She interviewed him pretty disingenuously, and it kind of fell backwards on her.
Okay.
And that kind of made him
Ricky,
look
I'll have to look it up.
Everybody idealized him.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a solid answer for you, but I'll have to check it out. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 1.5 minutes past the hour.
Hey, I want to make the case that we need single-payer health care for all Americans, and I want to do it based on my recent experience with total shoulder replacement surgery.
Okay.
Before I do, I just want to give you a real quick update on my Facebook page, Concerned Citizen. A couple months ago, we talked, and there were 4,000 followers. Now it's at 6,700 and growing.
Great.
I think it shows there's a real hunger for real news and commentary to counter the Trumpism effect that we have going on. Anyway, going back to total shoulder replacement, 3 weeks ago. Recently, I had a bill of $224. Now, my primary insurance is through my wife. It's United Healthcare, and my secondary is Medicare A. And I called the billing office to see if the secondary wouldn't cover it. And in the conversation, I learned that my 2-day stay in operation cost, hold on, $65,000.
Wow.
Now, I'll gladly pay $224, but I can't imagine what it's like for those without insurance. And this is why we need single payer, so individual people aren't wiped out by a single health occurrence like mine or even worse.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
I agree, and that's the whole point of insurance, is to spread the risk over a large pool of people. And in terms of healthcare, where today with today's technology and also the seizure of our medical system by for-profit hustlers, it's not uncommon for a simple diagnosis of cancer or some sort of orthopedic problem, in your case a shoulder, can be not just a $100,000 issue, it can be $1 million issue. And there's no way that even a small group can deal with that. So the larger the group, the more efficient it is, the better, the more economies of scale you have, and the better things work out. So spot on,
So
Steve.
I think I know that you're a big fan of the Scandinavian countries, Canada, UK, and their health care. And basically what it's doing is we would pay a little bit more in taxes, but then we spread the risk amongst us, and we cover those that have the misfortune of having a health care episode.
And we end up paying half as much at the end of the day, by the way. We pay twice as much as any other country in the world, and we pay 3 and 4 times as much as many developed countries for health care.
I do believe that the insurance companies themselves, just administering health care is approximately 20% of the total health care expenditure. And if we would remove that and just deal directly the providers with the patients, we would have a much more logical system. I mean,
it's not 20% to provide the care. It's 15 to 20%, depending on the size of the insurance company, is the statutory limit under Obamacare of how much profit a health insurance company can make. So they get to, Medicare runs on zero profit. So it doesn't skim anything off the top. Medicare runs at a cost of just under 3% to administer Medicare, to pay the checks, to deal with all the administration, to deal with all the paperwork, to answer your calls, all of that, 3%. The big insurance companies are making 15 to 20% in profits, and then on top of that, there's CEOs like the Stephen Helmsley, the CEO of United Healthcare, has taken over $1 billion in income and stock dividends and stocks and whatnot from United Healthcare. Every penny of that came from their saying to you, Steve, sure, we'll pay for your shoulder, but you're going to pay $200 of it, or you're going to pay $500 of it, or we're not going to cover it at all. And so, their administrative overhead is probably 3%, just like Medicare, but they're charging us, far, far more than that. Steve, thanks for the call. And yes, solid. And thanks for the Concerned Citizens Facebook page. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls right after this. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, there was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, "Let me try the son of a bitch. I can hit him." He got down off his horse, kneeled down, and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped. We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One thing I want to quickly share with you, and then I'll get back to picking up your phone calls. There is a strategy that lobbyists have used for years and years. Nate, I don't think I'm on the air here. There we go. Thank you. There is a strategy that lobbyists have used for years and years to increase their power. And they've actually succeeded in doing this in several states. And the way that lobbyists increase their power in corporations and other, the institutional right wing is by promoting term limits. If you are a newly elected member of the Michigan State Legislature or the Wisconsin State Legislature or the U.S. House of Representatives, if you're a newly elected member, you need somebody to basically mentor you on how to do your job. How do you write a bill? How do you introduce legislation? Who are the power players? Who do you talk to? Who should you avoid? What are the issues that are of great importance? What are the things that, how do you deal with your constituents? How do you interact with people? And historically, the way that you learn these things as a newly elected member of Congress is by hooking up with one of the older, long-serving members of that legislative branch and having them basically take you under their wing and walk you through it, teach you how to do it. But if you can get rid of those long-serving members who know where the body's buried, who know how to get things done, who know what the issues are, who know how to do all the things in this list that I just went through, if you can get rid of those people, then when new people come in, they have to turn to the remnant of the institutional structure around members of Congress. If there isn't an institutional structure of older members who can tell you what's going on, older in terms of tenure, then what do they have to turn to? They have to turn to the lobbyists. Because while the people who were elected to Congress 4 years ago may now be pushed out by term limits, the lobbyists who were here 6, 8, 10, 12 years ago, they're still around. And they're more than willing to take your hand, and they're more than willing to tell you how things work, and they're more, of course, all with their spin. So term limits, pure and simple, are nothing more than a way to increase the power of lobbying organizations, to increase the power of billionaires, to increase the power of corporations that hire these lobbyists. Pure and simple, period. End of story. And now I get this email from Donald Trump. Actually, this is from Team Trump. Dear Fred, President Trump has given his full endorsement and support for congressional term limits. Too many career politicians have spent an eternity in office governing for themselves rather than doing what the people voted for. The president vows to lead a bipartisan fight for term limits, but he can only succeed with your support. President Trump ran for the White House on a pledge of draining the swamp that has selfishly put its own interests above Americans. This cannot happen unless we impose term limits on all members of Congress. You get the level of BS here? I mean, it's like, it's up to our nose. It's hard to breathe. Please join the president. And this is a hot link to donate money to the Trump campaign so that you can help pay for Paul Manafort, or excuse me, Michael Cohen. You can help pay Michael Cohen's legal expenses, and of course Uday Nkuse's legal expenses as well. Please join the president with a healthy contribution as he fights to impose term limits on all members of Congress in a critical step to drain the swamp. Thanks, Team Trump. Right. Ian in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. Hey, Ian, thanks for watching. What's up? What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. This is a little bit long, so bear with me. I like to go around the conspiracy parts of YouTube from time to time. And it's not just the basic conspiracies, but the stupid stuff too, like how reptiles control the world, stuff like that. And it wasn't uncommon to see ignorant, stupid comments. But within the past year, I've been seeing them switch to typical dumb conspiracies to now being anti-Semitic and blaming the Jews for the problems in the world.
Right, and the code language for that is typically Bilderbergers or Soros.
Yeah, but it switched over to like now it's the Jews, the triple parentheses, they,
right,
that type of stuff. And I just see I don't see the alt-right movement disappearing after Trump leaves office. And they feel like they can't use the democratic process to get their way. I feel like they could be militant eventually because in their mind they feel extremely justified.
They are already. You didn't watch the video from Charlottesville, Virginia?
Yeah, exactly. And it's getting worse like that. It's getting the moderates as well, the relative moderates as well.
Yeah, agreed. So what do you want to do about it, Ian?
No, I was just wondering, do you think it's possible that there could be a rise in an anti-Semitic white nationalist movement? Or do you think the white nationalist movement is too split between the white supremacists who hate Jews more than Muslims and the ones who hate Muslims more than Jews?
I don't think there's any split at all. I think that, just like most people can chew gum and walk at the same time, hateful, bigoted people can hate Jews and hate black people and hate Muslims. And as Donald Trump has taught us all, it's possible to do all those things. And I'm very concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism, too, as well, here in the United States and all around the world. Ian, thanks for the call. It is a really important issue. Paul in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, just called to say there's a very good editorial on CNN, Nick Robertson, about the end of the democratic century, where the GDP of autocratic countries, China, Russia, et cetera, is going to be bypassing the social democracies of Europe and the U.S., where there's free press.
Mm-hmm.
And the impetus is such that they're thinking it's going to be about a third here in the next 10 years.
1/3, what?
50-50.
What is going to be 1/3?
The emerging markets like Brazil and other countries are going to follow Turkey rather than France.
Into autocracy rather than democracy.
Into autocracy, and why fight it? The other people who use what little truths they spread around amongst the lies are pushing so hard. Just join them.
Well, that's what's happening in the United States right now.
Europe, if you can't beat them back, join in the throng.
Yeah, that's what's happening right now in the United States. You're seeing autocratic tendencies.
It's almost a 5-year anniversary of the bomber, or the alleged bomber, Muhammad at Portland's Pioneer Square.
Yeah.
And what a big deal they made out of that. Someone who was groomed and manipulated to the nth degree, hundreds and hundreds of hours, talking him into doing things that weren't in his nature. And compare that to the guy who went under the radar when the Austin bombs were going off, Mr. Morrow, Benjamin Morrow, in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. 28-year-old white supremacist. The Baptist minister who buried him said he wasn't a bomber. Well, if he wasn't a bomber, why was all that acetone in his apartment? They had to raise the whole complex.
Right. Yeah. No, and what we know now is that since 9/11, we've had about 70% of deaths caused by terrorists in the United States were caused by white nationalist terrorists, anti-Semites, and only about a third.
They're good Christians.
Yeah. Right, or at least they call themselves that. I agree. I agree, Paul, and I think that this is a big issue, and it's something that we need to be talking more about. Is what does autocracy? What is an oligarchy? Which is what Jimmy Carter on this program said the United States is now. We're no longer a democracy. We're an oligarchy. What does that mean? What does it look like? And of course, it's anti-democratic, anti-small d democratic. It means that the will of the people has been usurped and has been replaced by the will of the very, very rich. And this was the essence of Gillen's and Page's study out of Northwestern University back 3 years ago, where they found that if you were in the top 10% of Americans, the probability of your political and economic desires being acted out legislatively was measurable, but not real high. If you were in the top of 1%, the probability of your desire with regard to economic and political actions was highly measurable, and there was a clear correlation between what the top 1% wants and what gets legislated into law. But the bottom 90%, if you look at, you take the top 100 issues that for the bottom 90% are really important, and you ask, are any of these being made into law at the federal level or at any state levels? The correlation is equivalent to random noise. In other words, there's no evidence that the bottom 90% of Americans, all the rest of us, are getting what we want out of the political system. And that is a signal, that is a sign of oligarchy. That's a sign of autocracy. That is like one of the primary symptoms of it. And this is why, in my opinion, Thomas Frank wrote a book about this called Listen Liberal. And in his book, he pointed out that the Republicans have been the party of the 1% basically forever. Throughout the lifetime of anybody who's still alive, the Republican Party has been the party of the 1%, going all the way back to the, with the exception of that little burp of Teddy Roosevelt and the whole kind of semi-Republican progressive movement and President Taft. If you pulled that out, you can take it all the way back to the 1860s, that the Republican, or the 1870s, when the radical Republicans got pushed out of the Republican Party, Thaddeus Stevens and his buddies. You could say the Republican Party has been the party of the 1%. But the Democratic Party, starting in the late 1990s, or the early 1990s, the late 1980s, the Democratic Party had become the party essentially of the top 10%. The deal that Bill Clinton and Al Fromm made when they created the Democratic Leadership Council was that the Democratic Party was going to become the party of white-collar and pink-collar workers, principally white-collared workers, as opposed to the Republicans, who were the party of the guys wearing tuxedos, the fat cats. And Paul, thank you for the call. What Thomas Frank says is the Democratic Party needs to go back to their pre-1992 roots, with the Great Society and the New Deal, and start being once again the party of 99% of Americans, the bottom 99%. And I think a lot of good Democrats are moving in that direction. It's a good thing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We will check in with Talk Media News after this brief break. Stick around. It's Friday. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Andrew in Gardner, New York. Am I saying that right, Andrew? Watching this on YouTube?
Yes, it is. I had a couple of quick quotes from Nostradamus that I thought were kind of interesting.
Okay.
People think Nostradamus wrote all of his quotes out of order, all of his prophecies. And I thought, what if he wrote them in order? I thought it was interesting, so I started looking up things like 1945. So I started looking up the 45th quatrain of all the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote them in groups of 100. And I found one that was interesting in Century 4, Quatrain 45. Through conflict, a king will abandon his realm, Hitler killing himself. The greatest chief will fail in time of need, FDR dying. And dead, ruined, few will escape it. All cut up, one will be a witness to it. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the fact that was the first war that we had on video. I thought that was interesting. And then the one then that would apply to this year, or to, to next year, would be the Great Royal One of Gold, augmented by brass. Trump, all his gold signs, they're really made of brass.
Mm-hmm.
The agreement broken, war opened by a young man, either North Korea or Iran. People afflicted by a lamented chief, the land will be covered with barbarian blood.
Whoa.
So a little frightening, but hey, part of the point of making these prophecies is maybe to prevent things.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. Let's hope so very much. Andrew, thanks for sharing that with us. It's fascinating stuff. Nostradamus has been used by many people over the many years for a whole lot of different purposes, but it's fascinating to read his quatrains. Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind?
How you doing today, Tom?
I'm well. How are you, Barbara?
I would call you a citizen, Tom, but the last time I did that, you said we were in a revolution.
Yeah, that was the French Revolution, yeah. So what's up, Barbara?
I listened the other day to TMZ, and I listened to Kanye West.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, Kanye West is doing what he's doing. He's broke. Really. He owes the IRS tons of money. So he's trying to do anything he can do to sell an album.
Yeah.
Which my kids are into, the rap and all this stuff. And my older son said the album is lousy.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I didn't know he was broke, but that adds another understandable dimension to it.
I mean, he's not just literally, flat out broke. He has money, but he doesn't have what he had before, and he does owe the IRS quite a bit of money.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So he's got to do what he has to do. So, of course, if you go to the right wing that always want to tell blacks and Mexicans and Indians, it's your fault that you're in the condition that you are. If you had to come and join us, you would be a little bit better off. What really bothers me is there are poor Caucasians that are on the same programs that poor blacks, poor Mexicans, the Indians, I really don't know, and any other minority that's here in America that depend on. Mm-hmm. The money that we do receive from these so-called entitlement programs, we spend in the United States of America.
That's right.
Walmart is not a big conglomerate. By just being a big conglomerate, it's a big conglomerate because you can't go there now. You can't find a place to park because the place is packed.
Yeah.
You got certain food stores that have hiked up their prices. They're literally complaining. You go to the parking lot, you can't get in because the place is packed.
Yeah.
People are spending the little bit of money that we do receive. We give it back to this
You're right,
country.
and it stimulates and maintains the economy. You're absolutely right, Barbara, and that's another piece of the equation that everybody ignores. Barbara, thank you. So well said. I appreciate the call, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Luke Vargas of Talk Media News will be with us. Roku today. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is Luke Vargas of Talk Media News. Luke, welcome back to the program. What's going on in the world today?
Got a few things. I mean, we're getting a little bit of clarity or an attempt at clarity from the White House over this report yesterday from the New York Times that President Trump had ordered the Pentagon to draw up plans for a U.S. military pullout from the Korean Peninsula. The idea there perhaps being that he would sit down at the negotiating table with Kim Jong-un, and though not immediately putting this up for offer, would sort of outline where the U.S. might be willing to go over the course of a multi-year agreement in which North Korea would denuclearize and give up key components of its nuclear and missile programs. And this justifiably sparked a lot of nervousness in Tokyo in particular, where the Japanese are very wary of this notion that President Trump is going to basically abandon Japanese interests at the negotiating table, that he could be basically pushing the North Koreans to give up their intercontinental ballistic missiles, but not give up their short and medium-range missiles, and that couple that with a U.S. military pullout from the Koreas, you would see Japan and to an extent South Korea lose what they call the security umbrella that the U.S. has aimed
and Taiwan too, by the way.
Exactly. So, not surprisingly, President Trump came out today, said this is not on the table, but his attempt at making that point very clear was undercut by him, his own words several minutes later saying, yes, but actually I really do want to see the American 30,000 troops pulled out of South Korea eventually because we've got to save the money. And so, and you had National Security Advisor John Bolton also writing a letter saying that the New York Times report is false. I think the takeaway from this is that, yeah, I'm sure the administration does have a contingency plan for how the U.S. might scale back in the Koreas. I don't doubt that the president or people close to him have asked military leaders to make sure they have these plans in place so that we could hypothesize about it. But I also doubt President Trump would do this so quickly. But the message it does send, I think, to Kim Jong-un is, hey, work this issue. That President Trump, this goal that North Korea has long had, which I highly doubt has gone away despite this sort of, seeming eagerness to engage in diplomacy, is they want to split the U.S. from its allies in the region. And the issue where Trump has shown a repeated tendency to want to, talk about troop pullout and saving money. Pair that with the North Korean goal of driving a wedge between Korea and the United States and Japan and the United States. I doubt that the clarity the White House is trying to bring to this issue today dissuades Kim Jong-un from eagerly approaching this issue in talks later this month. So that's certainly a dynamic to watch.
Agreed. What else is up?
Well, we're hearing from the Egyptian government that troops from unspecified Arab countries are considering sending troops to Syria. This is a request that President Trump had made of those countries in a press conference last month. It's sort of an issue he's hinted at going back to his campaign, this notion that, yes, the U.S. is glad that we fought the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, but we don't want to have a long-term presence there, and we really have to get...
Wait a second, let me get this straight. We're trying to get the Sunni countries, again, Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite, arguably a Shia. We're trying to get the Sunni countries to engage in a war against another country in their region. Is that what we're trying to do? We're trying to drag them into a civil war?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, as if a good exchange would be ending the cost of having 2,000 troops in Syria in exchange for turning the already bad situation in Syria into something that resembles the conflict in Yemen.
Into a regional war.
Right. I mean, and so, yes, you went exactly to the risk of this strategy should it actually be implemented. And I have to say, as much as we have seen this military coalition of Egypt, the Saudis, and the Emiratis getting engaged in Yemen and having done some joint military work in Libya over the past 2 years or so, I do have hesitations that they are going to push this issue unless Trump decides to keep looping back to it. I mean, I think they are already, these countries are, as much as they've shown a willingness to push that fight in Yemen, I do think there is a wariness about opening up a whole other theater here. But if Trump does push this as sort of, hey, you need to help simply defray costs, he would need to really look the other way at the sectarian consequences of that kind of troop deployment. You're very right that it's easy to imagine a dynamic here in which Iranian-backed groups within Syria and Iraq see this as a reason to get even more invested in their military campaign, especially if there's a chance of killing Saudi or Egyptian or Emirati soldiers on the battlefield in Syria. So Trump is doing this for cost reasons, but I think would be very difficult to ignore the broader security implications that could come out of this.
Amazing. And in the minute we have left, Luke, what else is up?
Finally, I mean, taking us back to Iran, there are oil analysts who are warning about, they're starting to calculate what the impact on oil prices might be if the Iran deal crumbles. I think that's now viewed as a likelihood that Trump will nix this deal. And the question is, when he snaps back sanctions on Iran in the days that follow, how many countries join the U.S. in doing so? And that question has a big impact on oil markets. The U.S. Will probably ban a lot of Iranian oil from hitting the open markets. Does Europe go along with that? What about India and Japan and Korea? The difference there could mean the difference between $3 a barrel for gas in the U.S. It's currently $2.80, or $4 if the rhetoric really heats up dramatically in the weeks that follow the U.S. exit from the Iran deal. So, again, cross-cutting against President Trump's other newfound goal, which is to try and drive oil cheaper.
Right, but plus if Trump can succeed in jacking the price of oil, he's going to benefit tremendously his big donors, the whole Koch network, all these guys, these petro-billionaires.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. It's going to represent a choice between competing interests within the White House. Right. It seems to be the story of.
On the other hand, if the price of oil jacks up, it's going to also help the solar and wind industry. So
exactly.
It's a very interesting thing. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. Thank you. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Johann Hari's brand new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So he starts out talking about how he had been on antidepressants for most of his life, from his teenage years into his 30s. And then he says, then when I was 31 years old, I found myself chemically naked for the first time in my adult life. For almost a decade, I had been ignoring my therapist's gentle reminders that I was still depressed despite my drugs. It was only after a crisis in my life, when I felt unequivocally terrible and couldn't shake it off, that I decided to listen to him. What I had been trying for so long wasn't, it seemed, working. And so when I flushed away my final packs of Paxil, I found these mysteries waiting for me, like children on a train platform waiting to be collected, trying to catch my eye. Why was I still depressed? Why were there so many people like me? And I realized there was a third mystery hanging over all of it. Could something other than bad brain chemistry have been causing depression and anxiety in me and in so many people all around me? If so, what could it be? Still, I put off looking into it. Once you settle into a story about your pain, you're extremely reluctant to challenge it. It was like a leash I had put on my distress to keep it under control. I feared that if I messed with the story I'd lived with for so long, the pain would be like an unchained animal and would savage me. Over a period of several years, I fell into a pattern. I would begin to research these mysteries by reading scientific papers and talking to some of the scientists who wrote them. But I always backed away because what they said made me feel disoriented and more anxious than I had been at the start. I focused on the work for another book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs instead. It sounds ridiculous to say I found it easier to interview hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels than to look into what causes depression and anxiety. But messing with my story about my emotions, what I felt and why I felt it, seemed more dangerous to me than that. And then finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. So over a period of 3 years, I went on a journey of over 40,000 miles. I conducted more than 200 interviews across the world with some of the most important social scientists in the world, with people who had been through the depths of depression and anxiety, and with people who had recovered. I ended up in all sorts of places I couldn't have guessed at in the beginning. An Amish village in Indiana, a Berlin housing project rising up in rebellion, a Brazilian city that had banned advertising, a Baltimore laboratory taking people back through their traumas in a totally unexpected way. What I learned forced me to radically revise my story about myself, my story about the distress spreading like tar over our culture. I want to flag up right at the start 2 things that shape the language I'm going to use through all of this book. I'm reading from the introduction. Both were surprising to me. I was told by my doctor that I was suffering from both depression and acute anxiety. I had believed those were separate problems, and that is how they were discussed for the 13 years I received medical care for them. But I noticed something odd as I did my research. Everything that causes an increase in depression also causes an increase in anxiety, and the other way around. They rise and fall together. It seemed curious, and I began to understand it only when, in Canada, I sat down with Robert Kohlenberg, a professor of psychology. He too once thought that depression and anxiety were different things. But as he studied it, for over 20 years now. He discovered, he says, that the data are indicating that they're not distinct. In practice, quote, the diagnoses, particularly depression and anxiety, overlap, end quote. Sometimes one part is more pronounced than the other. You might have panic attacks this month and be crying a lot next month. But the idea that they're separate in the way that, say, having pneumonia and having a broken leg are separate is not borne out by the evidence. Robert's side of the argument has been prevailing in the scientific debate recently. In the past few years, the National Institutes of Health, the main body funding medical research in the United States, has stopped funding studies that present depression and anxiety as different diagnoses. They want something more realistic that corresponds to the way people are in actual clinical practice, he explains. I started to see depression and anxiety as like cover versions of the same song by different bands. Depression is a cover version by a downbeat emo band, and anxiety is a cover version by a screaming heavy metal group. But the underlying sheet music is the same. They're not identical, but they're twinned. The second insight comes from something else I learned as I studied these 9 causes of depression and anxiety that he writes about in this book. Whenever I wrote about depression and anxiety in the past, I started by explaining one thing. I am not talking about unhappiness. Unhappiness and depression are totally different things. There's nothing more infuriating to a depressed person than to be told to cheer up or to be offered jolly little solutions as if they were merely having a bad week. It feels like being told to cheer up yourself by going out dancing after you've broken both your legs. But as I studied the evidence, I noticed something that I couldn't ignore. The forces that are making us depressed and severely anxious are, at the same time, making even more people unhappy. It turns out that there is a continuum between unhappiness and depression. They're still very different in the same way that losing a finger in a car accident is different from losing an arm, and falling over the street is different from falling over the cliff. But they are connected. The book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. David Hogg of Parkland High School has he just tweeted this out, attainable goal. Every high school in America has a voter registration drive on or before May 29th. And then he has a sign-up link. It's at headcount.org/sign-up. Flip it blue, Blue Wave 2018, vote them out. I'm not sure that those are his hashtags or not. But good stuff. Good stuff. Ivan, it's Anything Goes Friday. Ivan, listening to WCPT in Chicago. Hey, Ivan, what's up?
Hey, thank you, Tom. Hey, I need a minute here. I'll be quick.
Okay.
When President Obama was elected, I naively believed that hope and change had finally come to my America, and we would finally confront our past sins of slavery, Jim Crow, the genocide of our native Indian brothers and sisters, and become the red, white, and blue state Obama said we are. And King's dream might finally come true. This confrontation of sins is what the Christian, Vietnam Marine Corps veteran, and patriot, the Reverend Wright, was addressing in his, I don't know if I can say it or not, G.D. America sermon.
Yeah, thank you for your caution, Ivan.
And when President Obama threw Reverend Wright under the bus, the racist snakes who had been driven underground by the Brown decision, the war on poverty, the civil rights movement, allowed these snakes to come out of their holes, and emboldened by the GOP attacking and obstructing President Obama every day for 8 years, culminated in the political takeover by the teabaggers and the election of race-pandering Donald Trump.
And the billionaires who supported and essentially created the Tea Party. I mean, this is something that the tobacco industry had originally trademarked the name, and then the Koch brothers and their network picked it up and ran with it.
But what I'm saying,
I think your
Tom,
analysis is right.
If the president had supported the Reverend Wright, We had an opportunity to address these issues.
Right. Yeah. Well, at that point in time, though, then candidate Obama was dealing with basically a firestorm, and the reality, the subtleties of the reality of what Reverend Wright was saying were never going to be addressed by the media. We've got a media that's incapable of dealing with that. They only got that he said, gee, damn America,
But Obama was already president when Wright gave that sermon.
I thought this happened. I thought this all came out in the 2008 campaign, or the 2008 campaign.
No, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was after the election.
Huh.
And Reverend Wright thought he had an opportunity to make his point.
No, I think this was back when Obama was a senator. But I might be wrong, Ivan. But in either case, the problem is that our media is incapable of dealing with nuance. It only deals with bumper sticker. That's half the problem. And Ivan, thanks for the call and for pointing it out. The other half of the problem is that no matter what happens, if you've got a battle between a conservative meme and a liberal meme, the conservative meme is almost always going to win because there's this huge institutional infrastructure, this multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. The billion-dollar network of radio stations that Clear Channel owns, the billion-dollar network of radio stations that Cumulus owns, Salem Radio Networks, with Hugh Hewitt and all these guys. Never a liberal, never even a moderate voice on any of these places. Fox so-called News, owned by billionaire Rupert Murdoch, another billion-dollar enterprise. Right-wing billionaire-funded think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity, on it goes. There's this huge infrastructure. So when they get a hold of a meme that they think is destructive to Democrats or to progressives, they take that in a way and they run with it in a way that you can't rebut it. I think Obama basically had no choice but to throw Reverend Wright under the bus. I disagreed with it at the time as an appropriate, morally appropriate thing to do, but I absolutely understood it as being politically pragmatic. It's a tragedy. It's a sad commentary on the state of politics in the United States, and it's a sadder commentary on the state of our media. But it's real. So that's what happened. Stephen in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Stephen, what's up here? You're saying that Democrats are bigots?
No, not at all. What I was saying to your guy that answers for you is that all week we've been listening to the problems that the Republican Party and conservatives have with racism, and I was just explaining that I felt that white liberals get just as much hate from these people as other minorities. In fact, we're a larger minority that gets this hate because you can't talk to these people.
Who are these people you're talking about, Stephen?
Friends, relatives, people I used to work with in the unions.
You're talking Trump supporters, basically?
Yeah, they've all gone to conservatism, and I know part of that's with age, but still, I find there's a lot of animosity and hate towards liberals nowadays that back during even Reagan years, it didn't exist like this.
Oh, yeah. If you look at the arc of the 8 years that Reagan was president, it was in the sixth or seventh year that Rush Limbaugh went on the air in '87, and began this whole, let's hate liberals thing and vilifying even the word. I mean, in the mid '80s and even toward the end of the '80s, there were still a lot of Democrats who called themselves liberal. Throughout the '90s, virtually every Democrat abandoned the title liberal. And, part of that was encouraged by the whole DLC, Clinton wing thing saying, no, we're not liberals anymore. We're in with the banksters. But, a large part of that was the absolute screaming damage that was done to the word by, again, that entire right-wing media infrastructure. Ken Vogel did a piece about this. And Stephen, thanks for the call and for making this point. Ken Vogel did a piece on this for Politico some time back about how about how the Heritage Foundation is shipping millions of dollars every year to Limbaugh, spiffing him, to Hannity, to all these guys. They're making money hand over fist. It's unbelievable to build out, to maintain this media infrastructure. It's on the progressive side, it's a little bit more of a struggle, shall we say. Byron in Goose Creek, South Carolina. Hey, Byron, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I had a question. You covered the universal basic income, like the alternative to that, with a guaranteed government job.
Right.
And I had a question about it because I want everything you were saying about it. I agree with, and I like it better than the universal basic income idea. But what I'm curious about is I'm a restaurant manager. I get a lot of employees that, frankly, don't deserve jobs and honestly seem to not really want a job. They'll come in, get hired, work for a couple weeks, get a paycheck, and then we never see them again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, because in terms of what I do for a living, everybody that's there is there for a specific task that needs to be done. It's essential. It's like parts of the machine. And I'm wondering if this government jobs that you're talking about are non-essential and doesn't matter so much if people are kind of floating in and out of it.
Right. Two thoughts.
Don't want to come to work. I don't know how that part works.
Yeah, the first, Byron, is that if you paid better, you probably would get a better caliber of person who's more interested in staying for a while. I realize the margins are really, really tight in your industry.
Of course. We have tried that, though.
Yeah. Okay.
We're very competitive.
Yeah. The second is government, good. The second is that government workfare programs, for lack of a better phrase, the CCC, the WPA, those kind of things, are, first of all, are not unique to the United States. That's a big part of the economies of a lot of developed countries. Mm-hmm. And Germany did a really interesting thing during the recession with what they call the Kurzarbeit program, which is German for short work. And what the German government did is they said to German companies, we would like you to, since there's less demand for our products, we don't want to create unemployment, we don't want to hurt our own economy by reducing the purchasing power of working people, because it's the purchasing power of working people that literally drives the economy. And so we don't want to have a deep and serious recession by throwing these people out of work or putting them on unemployment where they're getting a fraction of their original pay. So if you will take your 40-hour workers and have them work only 30 hours a week, and you pay them for the 30 hours a week, we will compensate them for the additional 10 hours a week. We will pay you, and you can pay them for the additional 10 hours a week. So you continue paying them for a 40-hour week, even though they're only working a 30-hour week. This program was done all across Germany. It involved hundreds of thousands of people. It was called the Kurzarbeit program. They did it throughout the last half of 2008 and all of 2009. Right. And the result of that was that out of all the developed countries in the world that went through that horrible recession of 2008, 2009, 2010, Germany recovered faster than anybody else did. So that's, so I tell you that story by way of saying that there's nuance in this thing, right? There's gradations, but the gross program, as it were, the if you can't find a job, because capitalism has failed, because the economy has gone through the periodic cyclical hiccups, typically every 6 to 8 years, where the economy crashes for a year or so and then it kind of recovers. If you can't find a job, we will provide you with a job. Typically, those jobs were doing things in the commons, doing things that need to be done broadly for everybody. In the case of the WPA, the Works Progress Association, it was, or administration rather, it was building dams, it was building roads, it was building bridges, those kinds of things. In the case of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, it was clearing land for farmers, clearing forest land on the one hand, and on the other hand, it was building forest land, planting trees along hedgerows, planting trees around farms. One of the problems with the Dust Bowl that was causing the Dust Bowl was the fact that all the trees had been wiped out in so much of the central parts of the United States. And during the CCC, they replaced literally millions of those trees, and that ended that erosion problem, so the Dust Bowl has not repeated since then. The pay on these things was not all that great. The pay on the CCC was lower than the pay for the WPA. WPA jobs were harder to get because they were construction jobs. They paid a whole hell of a lot better. And but basically you had these two programs, and there were then another half a dozen programs, alphabet programs, that kind of died out very quickly. But those are the kind of things that typically are done, and that are done in other countries as well, and that I think that we need to have done. We've got a $2.5 trillion shortfall in infrastructure in the United States. We should be building that with people who are otherwise unemployed. Byron, thanks for the call, and thanks for bringing up a really important topic. Much appreciated. It's coming up on 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Welcome back. Bruce in Spicewood, Texas, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for your show. I listen almost every chance I get.
Thank you.
I wanted to tell you, I was in Oklahoma in March, and I found out that there were German internment camps in the Oklahoma area, and they had 20,000 German POWs in about 6 or 7 different bases in Oklahoma, and they used them to do labor, like work on farms, sidewalks, all kinds of weird labor things. And I've never heard of that before. Of course, I heard about Japanese internment camps, but they were locals. And I was just wondering if you happen to know any of that.
I don't. I know that there's a whole kind of largely unknown history to Germans, attacking the United States that FDR tried to bury. There were a number of German submarines off the East Coast. They successfully took out a number of merchant ships. There was a landing, as I recall, of Germans. But how 20,000 Germans ended up in an internment camp in Oklahoma, I have no idea, Bruce. Did you learn that?
Yeah, so I did not. I just thought I would throw it out there in case anybody's interested. One of the places is called Fort Gruber, Gruber.
Huh.
And I was just visiting up there and saw a German burial ground. I'm like, what the heck is that doing here? And started looking around, and that's what I found out.
Yeah. These were not unlike the Japanese Americans, these were not American citizens who were interred. These were actual German citizens who were caught.
Yeah, POWs, some from Africa, but mostly Italy and Germany. Or Italy and France, I'm sorry.
So we were shipping POWs back here. Well, I guess, when Hitler occupied most of Europe, there wasn't probably much space for that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I no idea. I had no idea, Bruce. I'll have to see what I can find out.
For fun, you can find that stuff on okhistory.org. They have a little bit about it, and they just put in Fort Gruber anywhere, and they'll talk about it.
I will check it out. Thanks. You've piqued my curiosity. I appreciate the call. Gary in, hang on just a second here. I think I just lost my software. Oh, geez, that's not working. Bruce, if you're still there, if you could hang up, please, I'd appreciate it. I have lost my ability to hang you up, and I'm going to have to quit out of this thing and restart it, and we'll see what happens. It's a Friday, right? Oh, I was looking at the wrong camera too. So let's retry this. Hit run. There we go. And in the meantime, if I can't put people on the phone, I can share a couple of stories with you. This particularly interesting one is how Scott Pruitt helped the Arkansas poultry giants pollute one of Oklahoma's prettiest rivers. This is a real tragedy. Well, maybe it's working now. There we go. Okay, it had locked Gary down. Okay, do I have enough time? He said, I have 25 seconds. Okay, not enough time for a caller. We'll put you on as soon as we get back. When Scott Pruitt was the Attorney General of Oklahoma, he basically allowed Arkansas farmers, and these are factory farms, chicken farms, giant chicken factory farms, allowed them to massively pollute the Illinois River, which flows from Arkansas into Oklahoma. He was the Attorney General of Oklahoma. He was supposed to protect Oklahomans from this poison coming, and instead, he got in bed with the donors, with the lobbyists, with the chicken companies, the chicken producers, and basically poisoned his own state. This is the guy that Donald Trump puts in charge of making sure that we're not poisoned by these same kinds of polluters. There's something fundamentally wrong here. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Let me switch off of that. Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
What I was calling to ask about was the previous gentleman that was talking about Reverend White and all the obstruction that the Republicans did. And I won't deny the fact that obstructions, it's a long time since either party has ever had a kumbaya with the other party on either side of the fence. But the question I have about
outside of wars.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. But and they both have vested interest in that.
Yep.
But the question I have is this. The one thing that the Republicans, and you correct me on this, did not really do anything to obstruct or change President Obama's foreign policy. That was pretty well much his call, his show, and his advisors. And I asked my son the other day, who is rather liberal, to put it mildly, and fairly well educated, to tell me some successful things about President Obama's foreign policy. And I'm not talking about just because of what's coming on with Korea right now. I don't care who caused it, but something's happened. But anything that could be told. I mean, I know we were respected around the world, but I don't know what that proved to us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it did for us.
I would say the biggest success of Obama's foreign policy during his 8 years was the Iran deal, which is why the Republicans are so gung-ho to destroy it, because they want, just like, this is the exact reverse of the Reagan Legacy Project. After Reagan left the White House, a bunch of billionaires funded this effort, which I think just wrapped up like 8 or 10 years ago, to put a statue in every congressional district in the United States, to put a major memorial in every state, and to put a Reagan memorial in every nation in the world, every developed nation in the world. And they have now succeeded in doing that. And so, they're trying to promote a legacy of Ronald Reagan as a great president. And whereas there was just a spontaneous effort to do this with FDR after he died. I mean, it was all Americans were all in on it. But this was organized by the billionaires to do this. They're trying to do the exact opposite with Obama. And it's the same people. It's the same billionaires and their sycophants. They're trying to make sure that there's no remnant of Obama's presidency, that any successes he had are destroyed, so that when history looks back on the Obama presidency, they'll say there was nothing there. I think that was his major victory, was the Iran deal. His major failure was probably Libya and arguably what's going on in Syria. But particularly Libya.
Let me ask you a quick question on this point.
Real quick.
Are there any parallels between the Iranian deal and what it was with Bill Clinton and the Koreans back in the 90s?
I think that the Iran deal was patterned after Clinton's deal with the North Koreans, which worked out very well, by the way, until George W. Bush blew it up with his Axis of Evil speech. Bill, thanks for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Clinton had the North Koreans nailed down. I mean, the whole nuclear program shut down, continuously monitored until Bush said Axis of Evil. That was the end of that. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. This is right after in the chapter where I lay out how the Supreme Court in 1886 actually did not rule that corporations are persons, even though the clerk of the court wrote that into the head note. And then we get into, where we got with this. This is page 109, the Republican conspiracy theory that empowered FDR. In the early 1930s, the stock market had collapsed and the world was beginning a long and dark slide into the Great Depression and eventually to World War II. Millions were out of work in the United States, and the questions on people's minds were, why did this happen and who's responsible? The teetering towers of wealth created by American industrialists during the late 1800s and early 1900s were largely thought to have contributed to or caused the stock market crash and ensuing depression. In less than 100 years, corporations had gone from being a legal fiction used to establish colleges and trading companies to standing as the single most powerful force in American politics. Many working people felt that corporations had seized control of the country's political agenda, capturing senators, congressmen, the Supreme Court, and even recent presidents in the magnetic force of their great wealth. Proof of this takeover could be found in Supreme Court decisions in the years between 1908 and 1914, when the Supreme Court, often citing corporate personhood, struck down minimum wage laws, workmen's compensation laws, utility regulation, and child labor laws, every kind of law that a people might institute to protect its citizenry from corporate abuse. Unions and union members were the victims of violence from private corporate armies and had been declared criminal conspiracies by both business leaders and politicians. It seemed that corporations had staged a coup, seizing the lives of American workers, the majority of voters, as well as the elected officials who were supposed to represent them. And this was in direct contradiction to the spirit expressed by the founders of our country. It was in this milieu that an American history book, first published in 1927 but largely ignored, suddenly became a hot topic. In The Rise of American Civilization, Columbia University history professor Charles Beard and women's suffragist Mary Beard suggested that the rise of corporations on the American landscape was the result of a grand conspiracy that reached from the boardrooms of the nation's railroads all the way to the Supreme Court. They fingered two Republicans, former Senator and railroad lawyer Roscoe Conkling, and former Congressman and railroad lawyer John A. Bingham. The theory, in short form, was that Conkling, when he was part of the Senate committee that wrote the 14th Amendment back in 1868, had intentionally inserted the word person instead of the correct legal phrase natural person to describe who would get the protections of that amendment. Bingham similarly worked in the House of Representatives to get the language passed. Once that time bomb was put into place, Conkling and Bingham left elective office to join in litigating on behalf of the railroads, with the goal of exploding their carefully worded amendment in the face of the Supreme Court. Thus, quote, Republican lawmakers, the Beards said, conspired in advance to give full human constitutional rights to corporate legal fictions. By a few words skillfully chosen, they wrote, every act of every state and local government which touched adversely the rights of corporate persons and property was made subject to review and liable to annulment by the Supreme Court at Washington, D.C. This conspiracy theory was widely accepted because the supposed conspirators themselves had said very publicly, we did it. Earlier, in an 1882 case pitting the railroads against San Mateo County, California, Conkling testified as a paid witness for the railroads that he had slipped the person language into the amendment, the 14th Amendment, to ensure that corporations would one day receive the same civil rights Congress was giving to freed slaves. Bingham made similar assertions when appropriate during his terms as a paid witness for the railroads. As a result of these assertions, through the late years of the 1800s, both of these two men were the well-off darlings of the railroad, basking in the light of their successful appropriation of human rights for corporations. When the Beards' book was widely read in the 1930s, it gave names and faces to the villains who had turned control of America over to what were then called the robber barons of industry. Conkling, Bingham, and Justice Waite were all dead by the time of the Great Depression and all judged guilty by the American people of pulling off the biggest con in the history of our republic. The firestorm of indignation that swept the country helped set the stage for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, using legislative means and packing the Supreme Court to turn back corporate power, and that corporate takeover, at least in part, and returning to average working citizens some of the rights and benefits that they had felt had been stolen from them in that Supreme Court head note in 1886. It was widely accepted that Conkling and Bingham had pulled off this trick successfully, purposefully saying person instead of natural person or citizen when they helped write the 14th Amendment, and corporate personhood was a fait accompli. It was done and couldn't be undone. The Supreme Court, confronted with the reality of the language of the 14th Amendment, had been forced to recognize that corporations were persons under the U.S. Constitution because of the precedent of that 1886 Santa Clara case. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge apparently ratified the coup on January 8, 1915, when he unwittingly promulgated Conkling's myth in a speech to the Senate about the 1882 San Mateo case cited above. It's 34 minutes past the hour of the Thom Hartmann Program, Talk Media for the rest of us. We had a caller who said he was in Oklahoma and had seen a prisoner of war camp that during World War II was used to inter German prisoners. And I was unfamiliar with the story. Just looked it up. 425,000 German prisoners lived in 700 camps throughout the United States during World War II. Really substantial. Most of them went back to Germany after the war. They went back learning a little English with a little money in their pockets and generally a favorable view of America, backing up George Washington's assertion in the Revolutionary War that when revolutionary soldiers took British soldiers as prisoners of war, that they should be treated well. And, you know, he said, give them no reason to complain. And this was at a time that the British, who were taking American prisoners of war, were killing them, were torturing them, doing just god-awful things. I mean, word spread. And what happened as a result of George Washington having the exact opposite policy was the same thing that happened in World War II. A large number of this 425,000 German soldiers who were interred in our camps here in the United States were here as a result of simply walking up to Americans and saying, I surrender. And the same thing happened during the Revolutionary War. British soldiers loved to surrender because they knew they'd be well taken care of. And in fact, the majority of them stayed in the United States after the Revolutionary War. It didn't happen with the Germans after World War II because at that point in time, you know, we had immigration laws that were put on the books in the 1930s. And so, you know, it would have been a whole song and dance, although a fair number of them actually did stay. So fascinating stuff. Thanks for that call. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Well, your birthday is Monday, and I was going to do your astrology like I did a couple years ago to remind you of it, but I think I'll do that next week, and I'd like to do Donald Trump's astrology for you right now.
All right, go for it.
Like all totalitarians, he manifests the negative qualities of his astrology. You manifest the positive qualities of yours. He's a Gemini born in the Chinese year of the dog. Gemini is the social butterfly. People who need people are the luckiest people. That's a Gemini, which explains why he'd crash social events he wasn't even invited to. Gemini is also the twin with two distinct personalities. One can be good, one can be bad, evil. Gemini is shrewd, yet indecisive. That's potentially dangerous. Superficial and self-deceptive. The dog is born under the sign of anxiety and loyalty, which is why he demands loyalty in others, but since he's a negative person, he doesn't return the loyalty. The dog's anxiety can best be described by your pet dog sitting in the living room and somebody walks by the house. What does the dog do? He runs back and forth, barking his head off, scratching at the window, and all that's happening is somebody's walking by the house.
That's Trump and the immigrant caravan.
Whenever the slightest thing happens, Trump is running back and forth, barking his head off, scratching at the window.
Yeah.
Dogs are also highly seductive. Many actors and models, and 3 of our last 4 presidents have been dogs. Clinton, W., and Trump. Each seduced the nation in their own way. And finally, Trump is born in the hour of the snake, which is wisdom. Negative wisdom in this case. Under the constellation the dragon, clever, quick to understand. This combination, wisdom, clever, quick to understand, when negative, can be extremely dangerous. Hitler had that.
Whoa. Whoa. Okay, David, thank you for the Donald Trump astrology lesson. That's fascinating, and I look forward to mine next week. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Well, yes, Tom, there were German prisoners of war. There was a camp in Windsor, which is about 20 miles southeast of Fort Collins, and they had relative, quote-unquote, freedom of movement. I think they went to church and whatnot, and, yeah, a lot of them wanted to stay, but, yeah, they did send them back. Also, have you ever seen, I think it's 3%.org, and while I was holding, you had mentioned something about going back into history on the Republicans. You know, the Republicans are saying, well, you know, we freed the slaves, but the Democrats, enslaved African Americans. Well, you know, the Civil War has been over for 153 years.
Yep.
So let's get up into this century. But my main point was that that gentleman, the veteran coal miner that you had on, I think it was Tuesday, maybe.
You're talking the 91-year-old guy who called in?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He has not lost his faith. He's not broken faith, I guess, with the Democratic Party, and and neither have I. Although there's a few warts, but the guy brought me to tears.
Yeah.
And he's the kind of people that we need. I have a friend that was absolutely hated Hillary Clinton so much she voted for Jill Stein, and the last time I saw her when she was back in town a few months ago, she shut up. She was usually a pretty vocal person.
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't work out all that well for the people who voted for Jill Stein, particularly in Michigan,
No.
Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
No, it didn't. And I think this man that came on there is a real hero in my book.
Yeah, I agree. And Nate, we put that up on YouTube, didn't we? The 91-year-old caller? Yeah, cool. Nate says it's on YouTube. So if people are curious what we're talking about, youtube.com/Thom Hartmann Program. Mike, thanks a lot for the call.
All right.
Good talking with you. Or maybe it's just youtube.com/Thom Hartmann. I don't remember which it is. Anyhow, it's easy to find. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Hey, my friend Tom. My goodness, I was speaking to a millennial even that works in your office there that kind of agreed that what I tell all millennials where they have to register Democratic, they say both are the same. And even though the DNC is screwing up big time, and they did with Bernie, and now Steny Hoyer just did with his congressman in Colorado, it doesn't look good. But I want to ask you and all your listeners, you have super intelligent listeners, and I have a game plan to count the vote, but it starts with registering as Democrat. I am going to try my best here in California to get rid of our 14 Republican congressmen because they count the vote legitimately here, but it's the registering, and it's the confusing, and it's the Green Party, and it's so many different things. Nationally, federally and statewide, we are a two-party system. You have to, you said succinctly today that the Democrats are for the 99 and the Republicans are for the 1%, and they always have been. And then you mentioned where Clinton took in 10%. Well, of course, there's more money to take from them, and it costs so much to run. And we're never going to get money out of politics.
I think we can, Jim. I think that America, we did this in 1907 with the Tillman Act, when Teddy Roosevelt got it passed, a law that made it a federal felony for any corporation to give money to any politician or any political campain. That didn't get struck down until the Supreme Court took it out in 2010 with Citizens United.
Yes, no, I would love that would work, but right now we got one game plan, and that is winning back the House and the Senate. Yeah. We have to win back the House and the Senate,
and a whole bunch of state houses. We've got to. This is something the Koch brothers have been pouring money into this thing forever. And it has produced the current crop of Republican ownership of most of the states, nearly 2/3 of them, enough that the Koch brothers are now trying to fund an effort to rewrite our Constitution, to have a constitutional convention, which is a huge danger to this country.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying, Jim, and I completely agree. And it's really important if you're going to register as a Democrat. James, and particularly in a state that has closed primaries, you might want to just find out. If your state has open primaries, it's not that big a deal because you can vote in any primary. But if you are in a state with closed primaries and you want your voice heard, you want to be able to vote for the Progressive Democrat in the primary, you have to register as a Democrat. And that's about half the states. James in Mineola, Texas. Hey, James, what's up?
Hey, I wanted to say something about the whole Kanye. And I think it's really weird how people have already said that before, that slavery was a choice. Dr. Claude Anderson said it. Tommy Sotomayor said it. I mean, a lot of people have said this in the past, and I don't get why he's getting such a jolt out of it now when it's already been said before. And something else that I wanted to say.
Well, just like something's been said, it doesn't mean it's true. Are you saying that you think that people who were enslaved continued their enslavement because they chose to?
It's the whole thing of give me liberty or give me death. That's the argument that a lot of people try to make, and I think that's being lost about just saying.
Are you saying because slaves didn't commit suicide, they deserve slavery?
No, I'm just.
I mean, a lot of slaves committed suicide, actually.
But
particularly after their children were taken away from them or their families were torn apart.
I know, Tom. That's what I'm sitting there saying. I understand. I'm a descendant of a slave. Okay, I'm a descendant of a slave. So I think that a lot of people don't get that argument inside of the black community. They don't understand that when you're sitting there saying that. And another thing about him meeting with Trump, there were so many rappers back in the day that all they did is put Trump in their rap music, all right?
Right.
But now, all of a sudden, now he's a racist and all this kind of stuff. But before, you were going to his parties, you were hanging out with him, you were putting him in your songs. Mm-hmm. And now Kanye says, hey, I like this guy. Oh my God. And Daz Dillinger, who was a full-time Crip back in the day,
yeah,
is saying go shoot him.
So your point is it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a change, right?
It's not that big of a change.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Okay.
And to hear people going off like they are is just making me irritating the dog out of me.
Okay, I got it, James. Thanks for the call and your contribution to the dialogue on our program here. I appreciate it. Very interesting. And you're right. You know, a lot of rappers were sucking up to Trump in a big way back when he was just a billionaire. Although it turns out maybe he never was a billionaire.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In fact, his best, David K. Johnson, Nobel-winning economist or Pulitzer or whatever it is, he's actually in debt. And welcome back. Ken, watching Free Speech TV in New Oxford, Pennsylvania. Ken, what's on your mind today?
Yes, it's just a follow-up from last Friday about the Corruption Act of 1912.
Hmm?
And the Corruption Act I wanted to bring up to our current year with our Congressman, Scott Perry. And this is a true story.
He's your Pennsylvania
Scott
congressman?
Perry used to be, we have gerrymandering now in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And what has happened now, the Democrats have always been the majority, but now it's going to be interesting in the change of dynamics in the political scene, because now my Congressman, Scott Perry, is now in the 10th Congressional District. He used to be in the 4th, which he was my congressman, no longer, but he actually sent me a certified letter, return receipt, that if I called his office for a follow-up meeting on corruption, I would be notified by the local police department and picked up for harassment charges. And what was interesting in Pennsylvania, we have the Mental Health Procedure Act, which would allow the police to pick me up and put me in a mental hospital for 2 weeks before I would get a hearing.
This is for calling your congressman?
Pennsylvania. Pardon me?
For calling your congressman, you can get put in a mental
my
hospital?
Congressman. He sent me a certified letter, return receipt. It was a definite. As I told my wife, she shouldn't have accepted it, but she did. And I said, I didn't want to open it, but I opened it. And then it was said, they notified the local law enforcement about me if I call for another
What had you done,
meeting.
Ken, to provoke this?
Pardon me?
What did you do to provoke this?
What I did, I spoke out because the man is corrupt to begin with. He's put into office by the Koch brothers, and he continues to be maintained by BAE Systems.
So how did you speak out?
I spoke up by bringing to people's attention what this man is all about.
No, I mean, Did you stand in front of him with a bullhorn, or did you write a letter to the? What did you say that provoked this response? What did you do?
I also wrote letters to the newspaper, the Gettysburg Times. That was one, and they refused to publish it.
Okay.
They refused to publish my letters.
So he's not reacting to that because it didn't get
newspapers.
published. What did you do that he is reacting to?
That I've implicated him with BA Systems money because they provide 300 to 400
Ken, you're not
jobs
answering my question.
in York, Pennsylvania. But it's also corruption.
Ken, you're not answering my question.
Go ahead.
What did you do? I'm not concerned about the content of it. What you said. How did you say it? Where did you do this? What did you do that provoked this response? Or is this something that he's doing to a large number of people?
No, what happened on August 8th, 2013, I was allowed to have a meeting with him in his Gettysburg office. And I also brought a witness to the fact, okay? So I wrote one letter to Obama, which was dated December 9, 2011, and he read that. And he read the thing, and he turned to me, to my witness also, said, is this all true? And in that letter, I implicated BA Systems, correcting the pollution and control where I used to live in East Berlin, Pennsylvania. And that these boys were supporting the Stucker Industrial Liquid Coatings in East Berlin, Pennsylvania, but they're operating out of York, Pennsylvania as well. And so what he did, he said, well, I'm going to have to look into this, and then I will get back to you. Well, once a month I would call him and remind him of the follow-up meeting.
Right.
And it got to the point where he then sent me a certified letter saying if I bring up anything of corruption of the past, I will be hit with an harassment charge.
Amazing. Ken, thanks for the call. That's fascinating. It's fascinating. The Republican members of Congress have to feel under siege. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk Media for the rest of us, the Thom Hartmann Program. Dennis, I don't have a city or state for you. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Festus, Missouri. It's in Jefferson County, one county south of St. Louis.
Great. And
I wanted to call today to kind of respond to something one of your other callers was talking about, and that's kind of the kind of pessimism surrounding millennials and people getting involved. I think as even in a place like Missouri here, I'm running for state office. In my county, there's a slate of great progressive candidates running. People are challenging Luke Kameyer and Jason Smith, and even on the national level. But people need to remember there's a lot of people running in places where they may not expect it. We've got a record number of candidates. And I think as far as the connection with millennials and the younger people go, we have to show them that, the Democratic Party, it's ultimately a democracy. And I think Bernie's candidacy kind of reinforced that. And we need to remember that message that we need to get involved and show them that they can take ownership of the party.
So are you running for office?
I am. I'm running for state representative in District 114.
That is great. Dennis, do you have a website you want to tell people about?
Sure. It's McDonald114.com.
And how do you spell
like
McDonald?
I said, there's a lot of other great candidates running too. So.
And how do you spell McDonald?
McDonald, just like the burger.
Okay. Okay, great. Cool. Dennis, I wish you the very best. Give us a shout and let us know how the primary goes, right?
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the call. Andrew in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, how you doing today?
I'm well. What's up?
I just have a quick question for you. Sometime back, an individual that was working at the Los Alamos Laboratories in New Mexico, who was, as it turned out, as a whistleblower, was severely beaten and hospitalized, and it was reported on TV, and I seen the video of the guy in his hospital bed beat so bad you couldn't, he was just totally wrapped up with bandage. You couldn't even recognize him.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just wondering, do you remember this incident? Because it's been within like the last 10 years, and I never heard more about it. That was all I heard, and that was the end of it.
I was unaware of it, Andrew.
Okay, I just wondered if you knew about it or...
No, I didn't. I'd have to do some digging. So if you learn anything more, though, give us a shout back. Marielle in Marietta, Georgia. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, that's correct.
Hey, Marielle, what's up?
Hi. I just had to comment after James with his, there have been other people who have said that slavery was a choice, and let me just address that first.
Sure.
and he, I'm black just like he says he is. And the 20th and 21st century mindset of black people who think that during the slave, because I've seen this for many decades, people saying, oh, I wouldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it. I would have done this. I would have done that. These people they weren't even native to this country. They didn't know where to go. They had been systematically beaten and, psychologically tortured. So they were enslaved. They also had no weapons. Only the white people had the weapons. I think it just draws, I don't know why he was so angry about something that stupid about the Trump stuff, but I'm more angry with the fact that there are people who really just truly don't understand what slavery was about.
Yeah.
So those people who think that these folks were captive out of their own, lack of initiative are just very ignorant.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
there were many unsuccessful slave revolts. Also, last thing about Trump in the 90s, the rappers. Trump in the 90s as like a celebrity type icon is quite different from the dangerous Trump of 2018, who's the president. That is something that anyone can figure out. That's the difference. He was just a guy trying to get into the celebrity parties or wherever celebrities were he wanted to be. But that's quite a different guy than who we have today in the White House.
He was just a rich buffoon then. And you're absolutely right, Mariel. People brought forcibly to this country, had their culture ripped from them, had their family histories ripped from them, had their religion ripped from them, had their language ripped from them, and then they were told over and over and over again, explicitly and implicitly by virtue of their slavery, that they were inferior to the humans who were enslaving them. And I mean, this is like the most horrible thing that can be done to human beings. And that's the history of this country.
It was the only life they had ever known in this country.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And there was no place to go. And the only successful slave revolt was in Haiti, and it was right around the turn of the 19th century, and it scared the hell out of the slave owners, but it led to
That's where my family's from, actually.
Yeah, and you had an independent government there, a black independent government that was the result of a slave revolt that we decided to take out. The United States said, we can't have that. That'll, that message will get to the American slaves. We can't have that. And we took it out. And yeah, it's a really, really, Mariel, I just have a few seconds left here. I've got about 20 seconds before we're going to hit the end of the show. Okay. How often have you heard this story that Kanye West is telling from contemporaries and peers and friends?
I have seen it with so-called woke folks. For years, I have seen that. So he is not alone in that thinking. But again, I think that people are applying their free mind, their mindset. We've been free in this country for, quite some time now, and they're applying the way that they have been allowed to think to what people should have thought. People who were brand new.
It's like these guys who say, "Oh yeah, if I was in a school and there was a shooter, I'd run right out there and take him out." Yeah, right. Not until you've walked in their shoes. Mariel, excellent, brilliant point. Thank you so much for the call. And thank you all for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeats.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beats, THOMSBEETS.com.